When I opened my eyes, the world around me was unfamiliar, yet strangely vivid. The scent of clay, smoke, and something sweet, maybe honey, lingered in the air. A linen curtain swayed gently beside a narrow window, revealing glimpses of a sun-drenched courtyard. I sat up slowly on a hard, low wooden bed. The mattress was stuffed with straw, and it creaked beneath me. I rubbed my eyes, still adjusting to the soft golden light that spilled across the mosaic floor. Somewhere outside, I could hear the bustling rhythm of the city. Sandals clapping against stone, a woman scolding a child, the call of a fruit seller. This was no dream. I was in ancient Rome. The room was modest, maybe belonging to a lower-class citizen or a freedman. A single terracotta lamp rested on a small wooden stool beside the bed. A folded tunic lay neatly on the other end. I noticed a chipped cup filled with water on the floor and took a careful sip. Lukewarm, metallic. My fingers brushed against the walls, coarse and cool, and my ears tuned in to the symphony of morning life outside. With cautious curiosity, I stood and dressed in the tunic. It felt rough, hand-woven, not like the soft cotton I was used to. Slipping on simple leather sandals, I stepped into the sunlight of the courtyard. The warmth was immediate, wrapping around my skin like a gentle embrace. Chickens clucked nearby, and a young boy darted past me, chasing one with laughter. A woman in a faded blue stola was kneeling beside a basin, washing laundry with slow, practiced motions. I crossed the courtyard and stepped into the narrow alley beyond. It was already alive with activity. The aroma of baking bread and spiced wine drifted from a nearby tavern. A man in a toga passed me, adjusting his belt and muttering to himself. Two slaves carried amphorae on their shoulders, grunting under the weight as they turned into a side street. From somewhere nearby, a priest chanted in Latin, his voice echoing above the rooftops. The city seemed to breathe with purpose. I walked slowly, trying to take it all in. The cracked paving stones beneath my feet, the red graffiti scratched onto walls, the faded frescoes of gods and soldiers on plastered facades. Every corner revealed a new rhythm of life. Vendors calling out their wares, children darting between stalls, and old men arguing politics near the public fountain. I passed a small shrine built into a wall, where a woman lit a candle and whispered a prayer before moving on. Suddenly, the scent of roasted meat caught my attention. I turned a corner and found myself in front of a small taberna. Inside, men huddled over bowls of lentils and cups of watered wine, their conversation rising and falling like waves. A large man behind the counter eyed me briefly, then returned to slicing cheese. I stepped inside, nodding politely. No one seemed surprised to see me. It was as if I belonged here. And maybe, for today, I did. Outside the taberna, the street bent toward the heart of the district. As I walked, the murmur of voices grew louder, deeper, more layered. The forum was near. I turned a corner and it opened before me like a stage. A wide public square paved in stone stretched out under the sun, surrounded by colonnaded buildings and statues of forgotten heroes. Stalls lined the edges, each draped in cloth and overflowing with goods, bread, olives, copper trinkets, dyed wool, amphorae filled with oil and wine. The scent of the market was overpowering. Sweet dates, acrid vinegar, sweat and incense smoke wafted together in a blend that clung to the skin. A boy with a reed flute played a wobbly tune near the steps of the basilica. A butcher, his apron stained red, called out today's specials while waving a cleaver. A pair of matrons stood beneath a fig tree gossiping behind fans, their hair pinned high with ivory combs. Everywhere there was motion, lively, loud, beautiful chaos, Roman life unfolding in its rawest form. I was bumped by a man carrying scrolls. "Oculi tui, amici," he muttered. "Watch your eyes, friend." I nodded, unsure how to respond, and kept walking. It was easy to get lost here, in the noise, in the people. I watched a child slip a fig from a vendor's tray, darting off before the woman could scold him. She only smiled and shook her head. Perhaps this was a daily occurrence. In the center of the forum stood a large marble fountain. Its rim was worn smooth by centuries of hands and resting elbows. I dipped my fingers into the cool water, savoring the moment. Nearby, a speaker stood atop a box, passionately decrying some governor's new tax. His words rose like flames, igniting murmurs among the gathered listeners. Some clapped, some rolled their eyes, and others simply moved on. Politics, I realized, was no different back then. It was performance. Ni gehamida pas de crowd im unaufschlichen sympathetic soul just laughing. The hammer shimmered faintly, but their demeanor was relaxed. They leaned against pillars, munching dates and watching the street like lazy lions. One of them winked at a passing girl, who responded with a snort of amusement. An old man in a tattered toga approached me, offering carved bone dice for a coin. "For Fortuna," he whispered. "She favors the bold." I took one from his hand, rough, yellowed, with faded pips, and gave him a coin. He bowed and vanished into the throng. I turned the die in my fingers. Perhaps today I'd be bold. A soft bell rang in the distance. It came from the direction of the temple, midday prayers. I wasn't sure what gods were worshipped here, or whether belief still meant the same in this place, but the sound was grounding. I looked around and saw others pausing, some making gestures, others continuing without care. Above me, gulls circled in the bright blue sky, their cries sharp and foreign. I felt strangely at peace. Magna abrauen Schicht. Roma pulsed around me. Alive, restless, ancient, and new all at once. As the forum emptied and the sun climbed higher, the heat began to press down like an invisible weight. The crowds thinned, shopkeepers leaned in the shade of their stalls, dogs napped beneath archways. Even the ever-chattering vendors grew quiet, their calls softening into lazy murmurs. The city, for a brief moment, paused. I followed the flow of people toward the bathhouse, a public therme that stood like a palace among the humbler buildings. Its entrance was marked by two towering columns, flanked by statues of gods, whose names I didn't know but whose presence felt eternal. Inside the air shifted, humid, scented with myrrh and sweat and warm stone. My sandals echoed across marble as I entered the changing area. Men should have dressed chatting and laughing, some wrapping themselves in towels, others rubbing oil into their arms. An attendant gestured politely and handed me a small jar of scented olive oil. I nodded, mimicking those around me, unsure of the ritual but curious. I stepped into the tepidarium first, the warm room. Moisture clung to the walls and my skin began to glisten immediately. I sat on a stone bench and closed my eyes. The sound of dripping water, low voices, and an occasional splash filled the space like a living lullaby. Io essis dine. After a time I moved to the caldarium, the hot bath. The heat wrapped around me like a second skin. A man nearby exhaled deeply, as if the warmth was drawing out all the burdens of his day. I dipped myself into the steaming pool, letting go of time. The water was deep and quiet. No one rushed. No one spoke above a murmur. Here, Rome breathed slowly. Later, in the frigidarium, the cold water was a shock. I gasped as I submerged myself, feeling every nerve wake from slumber. The sensation was sharp but cleansing. I emerged renewed, my skin tingling. I dried off slowly under an archway where filtered sunlight danced through steam and dust. Outside, the world had not changed, but I had. There was a certain stillness inside me now, like a lake that had finally gone calm. I walked with slower steps, no longer just observing, but somehow belonging. The noise of the city returned, muted but present. Laughter, the clink of metal, a distant cart rolling over cobblestones. I found a stone bench beneath a vine-covered wall and sat for a while. An old woman beside me hummed softly, knitting something from coarse wool. A cat slinked by and brushed against her leg. She smiled, but said nothing. I returned the silence. Not all moments needed words. In the distance, bells rang again. Later this time, more melodic. Maybe they signaled afternoon offerings or a magistrate's decree. It didn't matter. I leaned back against the warm stone and let my eyes close. The sun pressed gently against my eyelids, and for a moment I forgot the world I had come from. Rome had rid me of his own, and I had begun to match it. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the city softened once more. Shadows stretched long across the stone roads, and the golden light turned amber, then rose, then dimmed altogether. The warmth of the day faded into a gentle breeze that rustled olive branches and carried the faint scent of ash and rosemary through the alleys. I stood at the edge of the Tiber River, watching its slow, constant current move past worn boats and quiet figures on the shore. A fisherman reeled in his last catch beneath a crumbling arch. Children tossed pebbles into the water, their laughter now quieter, fading like echoes. The city didn't sleep, not yet, but it sighed, as if content with what the day had offered. I wandered through narrow back streets, lined with ivy and silence. Lamps flickered behind windows, casting warm halos against worn plaster walls. I passed a man closing the shutters of his shop, whistling an old tune. Farther down, two women sat on steps, sharing bread and speaking in hushed tones. The world was exhaling. The domus ere awakening greeted me like an old friend. The courtyard, now dim, still held the heat of the day in its bricks. I returned to the small room where it all began. The curtains swayed gently once again. I sat on the wooden bed, letting my sandals rest beside me. A single oil lamp glowed on the stool, its flame dancing but steady. Outside, a night bird sang somewhere in the dark. I lay back and listened to the distant clatter of hooves on stone, to laughter drifting from a nearby home, to the hush of the wind weaving through narrow lanes. Rome had given me a day, a single, full, ordinary day, but nothing about it felt ordinary now. I had seen its rhythm, tasted its bread, felt its heat and coolness, and walked among its people. It had welcomed me, not as a visitor, but as someone who, for a few precious hours, belonged. The air grew cooler. The lamp's flame dipped low. I pulled a light woolen blanket over myself and turned to face the curtain, now still. And as my eyes began to close, I let Rome fall asleep with me. Together, we dreamed. The first thing I remembered was the cold iron around my wrists. Not the scent of the sea, nor the heat of the sun, but the weight of chains that had become part of my body. I was called Livius now, though that was not my true name. My real name, the one my mother had whispered to me under stars far from Rome, had long since been stolen, forgotten in the smoke of conquest. They had taken us on a ship, crammed beneath the deck like cargo, the scent of vomit and rot thick in the air. When we arrived, the sky above the Tiber looked no different than home, but everything else had changed. I was sold at a market 3 days later. A tall man with a crimson cloak and a broken tooth bought me after thumbing my shoulders like he was judging a melon. I remember his words: strong back, quiet eyes, good for the furnace or the fields. That was 6 years ago. Since then, I had belonged to the household of Gaius Valerius Marcellus, a mid-ranking official who spoke little and smiled even less. His villa was vast, perched above the river with columns that caught fire each evening in the orange light. I lived below, in the cellar with the other laborers. We were given stale bread, a bucket for water, and strict rules. No speaking after dark, no lingering in the courtyard, and above all, never look directly at the lady of the house. My days were filled with labor. I hauled firewood, scrubbed marble floors until my fingers bled, and swept the ashes from Gaius's study after his endless scroll readings. He fancied himself a philosopher. His words were poison wrapped in silk. Freedom is an illusion the ignorant cherish. But it was her voice I feared, more than his. Domitia, his wife, was as beautiful as she was cruel. A single raised eyebrow could mean a whipping. She carried herself like a goddess and spoke to us only in commands. One morning I met her gaze by accident while carrying a basket of figs. She said nothing, but later that night I was dragged from my pallet and beaten until I could no longer see straight. In those moments I learned what survival meant. Silence, obedience, invisibility. But last night, everything changed. There was a guest at dinner, an old senator whose face I did not see. I was serving wine when I overheard their conversation. He spoke of unrest in the south, of slaves escaping in the hills, forming bands, hiding in the ruins of old temples. A flame and dry grass, he said. It only needs wind. I didn't sleep at all. I lay staring at the beams above me, heart pounding. For the first time in 6 years, something moved inside me. Not hope, not yet, but something more dangerous. Curiosity. The next morning began, like every other, gray, silent, and soaked in the scent of ash. I rose before the rooster's call, joints aching, and joined the others in the courtyard. None of us spoke. We didn't need to. We had learned each other's movements, our miseries forming a silent language of glances and gestures. As I carried bundles of kindling to the furnace, my eyes strayed toward the hills beyond the city walls. I had never noticed how green they were, how free they looked. For a moment, the words of the senator echoed in my head. Slaves hiding in the ruins, moving like ghosts through forgotten paths. I shook the thought loose and lowered my head. To hope was to invite pain. But that day, everything seemed louder. The clink of chains, the grunt of the overseer, the hiss of Dermisha's voice as she berated the cook for a burnt crust. Each sound scraped against my skin like broken pottery. I found myself gripping the handle of a broom tighter than usual, and when Gaius passed by me in the atrium, reciting verses about fate and obedience, I nearly spat. Instead, I bent my knee. By midday, I was assigned to help in the lower storeroom. The walls were lined with clay amphorae, sealed and stamped with the mark of the house. Grain, oil, salt, and at the far end, wine. Sweet Falernian imported from the coast, locked behind a gate I had never touched. Nichtlich im ganzen freiliegenden Dore, heftig ammerzt, wetzt entfalter. I stared at it longer than I should have. A flicker of madness, or perhaps destiny, stirred in my chest. I could take one bottle, slip it beneath my tunic, offer it to a guard, to a courier, to anyone with influence, trade it for a favor, trade it for a name, trade it for the first step out. But my hand still moved. Instead, I cleaned the floor with a rag soaked in vinegar and waited until the steward returned. I said nothing. I always said nothing. That was how you lived. That night, I found myself in the sleeping chamber again, eyes wide open, heart restless. I thought of my mother for the first time in years, not her face, but her voice. She used to hum when she worked, even when the rains ruined the crops or my father came home bleeding from another tax collection. She said the body could be bound, but the spirit was a river. I hadn't felt like a river in a long time. I began to count the days since I'd arrived in Rome. I stopped after 2,000. The number didn't matter. What mattered was that I could count. I was not broken. Not yet. The following days blurred together, sweat, smoke, and silence. But something inside me had shifted, even if no one else could see it. My tasks were the same, my chains still chafed, but I moved through the villa differently now. I observed, I listened, and I remembered. There were patterns in the household. Times when Gaius left for the baths, when Domitia retreated to her garden to speak with her caged birds, when the guards drank too much sour wine and dozed in the shade. I started to map these moments in my mind like a soldier planning a campaign. On the first day, I took a step. It was small, just a strip of cloth torn from a discarded tunic. I tucked it behind a loose stone near the stables, pressing it into the gap with shaking fingers. It wasn't much, just a marker, a test to see if anyone noticed. No one did. The next day, I moved a step further. I slipped a broken nail from the trash pile and hid it in my bedding. To most, it was garbage, but to me it was proof that I could act, that I still had choice, however small. That night I began whispering, only to myself at first, then to Dato, the older slave who slept near me. He had been here for 10 winters, his back a map of whip scars, his voice cracked like old leather. At first he said nothing, just looked at me with tired eyes. But on the third night, he whispered back. Careful, Livius, he said. Words are heavier than chains. But was listened. He said, I told him about the senator's words, about the hills and the ruins, about the old gods who still watched from broken temples. I told him I wasn't sure what I believed, but I was sure I couldn't die here, nameless and bent. He said nothing at first. Then, on the 5th night, he handed me something wrapped in cloth. A tiny piece of flint into which, for when the time comes, he said, it was heavier than it looked. The next morning, I worked as usual. I scrubbed floors, hauled firewood, nodded at commands, but each time I bent down, I felt the flint in my pocket like a second heartbeat. I wasn't ready to run. Not yet, but I was no longer standing still. The flint stayed hidden in the hem of my bedding, wrapped in old cloth and secrecy. I never touched it during the day, but every night when I lay on my back staring at the low-beamed ceiling, I would reach for it, not to use but to feel. It reminded me that something waited, that I had not imagined the crack in the wall. Data spoke little after that night, but his silence was changed. It wasn't fear anymore, it was watchfulness. He began to point things out in small gestures. When the cellar guard changed shifts, which steward had a habit of sleeping early, which gates were left unlocked too long when supplies were delivered. Then came Aelia. She was new to the household, bought only weeks ago. Young, with dark, guarded eyes and a walk that spoke of defiance not yet beaten out. She was assigned to kitchen work, and though we rarely crossed paths, I noticed how she watched everything, especially the overseers. One day, I caught her eye while unloading grain, and for a moment, something passed between us. Not a smile, not a word, just recognition. A mirror held up between strangers. That night, Data whispered, she hears things, learns fast. So I tested the waters. The next day, I dropped a folded scrap of linen near her foot while delivering wood. An accident, nothing more, but when I returned an hour later, it was gone. In its place, a stone with a slash carved into its surface. A sign, a reply. She was with us. The three of us never spoke directly. It was too dangerous. Instead, we used what we had. Scraps, gestures, glances. We mapped a language made of nothing and carried everything. At night I scratched patterns into the dirt beside my sleeping mat and erased them before the light returned. Every day the house continued as if unchanged. Gaius ranted about politics, Domitia threw cups when her tea was too cold, the guards laughed with meat in their teeth. But beneath it all, something was moving. A thread pulled taut. The night the storm came, it was Aelia who made the first true move. She slipped into the storage cellar soaked from rain, pretending to search for dry cloth. She paused near the amphora and left a folded wax tablet beside the wine jars. Later, when I retrieved it, the message was simple, scratched in a child's hand. 3 nights. North Gate, after second watch. Eu peux Secret tablet. I burned the tablet in the furnace. My hands shook for hours. Not because I was afraid. Because for the first time in years I believed escape was no longer a myth. It had become a plan. The next 3 days moved like molasses. Tick, slow and heavy with anticipation. Every breath I took felt like it echoed too loudly in my chest. I watched the sun rise and fall with the precision of a soldier counting the hours to battle. By day, nothing changed. I carried wood. Alia stirred pots and sliced roots in the kitchen. Dato limped through his chores, slower than he used to be, but still sharp beneath the wear of age. We said nothing out of the ordinary. Our faces stayed blank, our movements dull and mechanical. But beneath it all, something hummed. Tension, like a taut bowstring. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake, eyes fixed on the cracks in the ceiling, listening to the rhythms of the villa. The distant laughter of guards, the soft clatter of cups, the creak of the olive press turning in the dark. I memorized every sound, not out of curiosity, but survival. One wrong noise could cost us everything. The night before the escape, the rain returned. Not a storm this time, but a quiet drizzle, enough to muffle footsteps and mask soft whispers. I took it as a sign. Rome wept for us. Or perhaps it cleansed the path ahead. That morning, I saw Domitio for what I hoped would be the last time. She passed by the hallway where I was polishing the brass trays, her perfume trailing like smoke. She didn't look at me. She never did, but I looked at her, fully. For once, I allowed myself to see the face of the woman who had once ordered my beating over a broken bowl, and I felt nothing. Not hate. Not fear. Yes. Distance. She was already part of a world I no longer belonged to. That night, the plan moved. Daffo feigned illness used after dusk, clutching his side and groaning loud enough for the steward to fetch a draught of wine laced with herbs. Aelia spilled an entire pot in the kitchen, drawing the overseer into a long string of curses and distraction. I slipped from the courtyard during the noise, moving low past the animal pens and into the shadows along the stone wall. The north gate was ahead. Just beyond it, olive trees, hills, and the broken aqueduct rumored to lead to the old temple ruins. Aelia and I were to meet there. Dato would follow when he could, or not at all. He had said his part was done. I move slow, he'd said with a grin days before. But you run like fire on dry grass. At the gate, I paused. No alarm. No voices. Just wind and the soft patter of rain on clay tiles. I waited, and then out of the dark came Aelia. She emerged like a shadow born from the stones, silent, soaked, eyes blazing with more resolve than fear. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, the rain tracing lines down our faces like tears we hadn't earned yet. Then she nodded, once, and we ran. The gate creaked as we pushed it open, too loud, too slow, but no one stirred behind us. Beyond lay the olive groves, twisted trees reaching like broken fingers toward the clouded sky. Our sandals sank into the wet earth as we sprinted uphill, breath catching, hearts pounding. We didn't speak. We didn't dare. Behind us, Rome slept. Ahead, only darkness. The path to the old aqueduct was half forgotten, barely a trail at all. Roots tugged at our ankles, branches scratched our arms. I could barely see, but I followed Aelia's shape in the dark, trusting her instincts. Every sound, the hoot of an owl, the crack of a branch, made my muscles seize. Any moment could bring the shout of pursuit. But none came. At the aqueduct ruins, we paused beneath a collapsed arch. There, hidden in the grass, was what Dato had described. A pile of worn cloaks, a water skin, a crude satchel with dried meat and figs, supplies he had gathered over weeks, hidden bit by bit beneath broken stones. He had planned more than he let on. We didn't speak until dawn light began to creep into the sky, casting silver on the damp stones. That's when I finally let myself breathe. "We're out," I whispered. "For now," Aelia said. Her voice was hoarse but steady. We moved again at sunrise, careful and low. The goal was simple, reach the abandoned temple in the hills. From there, we could follow the shepherd's path east toward the coast, then disappear. Others had done it. Maybe we could too. We passed burned-out fields and broken statues, remnants of villages Rome had consumed like a beast swallowing its own tail. The world felt ancient, but wild, like we'd stepped outside the walls not just of a city, but of time itself. That night, we lit no fire. We slept under a thicket, curled beneath Dato's stolen cloaks, our backs pressed to the earth. My body ached, my feet were raw, and my stomach growled with emptiness. But I was free, and that word free repeated itself in my chest like a second heartbeat. Fragile, new, sacred. I didn't know what waited ahead. But for the first time in years, the road behind me didn't matter more than the one ahead. By the third day beyond the walls, our limbs moved more from memory than strength. Hunger gnawed at us like rats beneath the skin. The figs were gone, the dried meat down to scraps. We drank from creeks we found by sound alone, and once from a basin carved into a shrine stone where moss floated in lazy spirals. We no longer spoke unless we had to. The silence was not mistrust, it was survival. Our breaths were counted, our steps calculated. Every movement was measured against the question, is it worth the noise? Then came the sound we feared most. Hooves. Not many. 2, perhaps 3. Moving slow, deliberate. A patrol, not a chase. Yet, but close enough to taste the danger. Aelia and I ducked into the tall brush. I pressed my back against a half-collapsed wall, the stones cold and damp against my skin. My heart slammed in my chest, wild and angry. "Stay low," she mouthed. I nodded, swallowing the fear rising in my throat like bile. The riders passed just beyond the grove. 2 men in cloaks, spears at their backs. They didn't speak, but their eyes scanned the trees like wolves sniffing blood. Only when the sound faded into the hills did we move again. That night, we sheltered inside the shell of an old barn. Half the roof was gone, but it was shelter, and the wind had teeth. I collapsed beside a rotting beam, limbs trembling. Aelia sat across from me, legs drawn to her chest. Neither of us lit a fire. There was no warmth that didn't cost too much. "You've done this before," I said quietly. She hesitated. Once. I waited. It failed. Her voice was distant. "We got caught. 3 of us. I ran. The others didn't make it." I didn't ask what happened to them. Salmo ob Lörden ein Jönt ein Garde. Enthält man also Serzeit und its Augesteil, dass mein Venture Covery on 1 Smartphone BW Beauty, das Custom is for 559 aus Silence stretched between us, heavy and respectful. We shared a crust of stolen bread in the dark, half a bite each. Later, as the wind howled through the broken walls, I thought of my father, a strong man, not cruel, but hard. He once told me, "Chains are made of more than iron, boy. They're built from silence, fear, and habit." I hadn't understood then. Now I did. In the dark, I whispered to the ceiling, to the stars, to whatever God still cared to listen. Break me if you must, but never bind me again. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then silence. We reached the edge of the ruins just before dawn. The old temple stood like a wounded animal, its columns broken, its roof caved in, vines climbing its bones. It was once sacred, now forgotten, but for us it was a refuge. Aurelia knelt beside the altar and ran her fingers over the carvings. They were worn smooth by wind and time, but the outline of a goddess, Minerva perhaps, was still there, barely visible in the stone. "This is where they hide," she said. "The others." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. Somewhere among these woods, these stones, were more like us. Broken bodies, unbroken wills. We rested briefly in the shadow of the ruin. My legs ached. My hands were blistered. Aelia had a shallow cut on her shin from where we'd crossed a rocky gully the night before. I tore a strip from my tunic and bound it. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me and said, "Don't wait if I fall." I didn't answer. Instead, I stood and looked to the east. Smoke. A thin trail, barely a breath, rising behind a hill. Not a wildfire. A camp, maybe. Or a scout. "They are close," I said. "We move now," she replied. But we were tired. So tired. And tired men make mistakes. We made ours after sundown. We had just crested a ridge when we saw them. 3 riders, spears glinting in the moonlight. They hadn't seen us yet, but they would. The brush was too thin, the moon too bright. I gripped Aelia's hand. "Split," I whispered. "And us? They'll catch us both if we stay." She hesitated, but only for breath. Then she nodded. We ran. Branches whipped my face. Stones rolled underfoot. Some were behind me, shouting. Then the sound of a horse crashing through thickets. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran until my lungs felt like fire, until my vision blurred and every heartbeat felt like a hammer strike. Then, nothing. No voices. No hoofbeats. Just wind and my own breath. I collapsed behind a boulder, chest heaving. I waited. Minutes passed, then a rustle. Soft, deliberate. "Aelia." She dropped beside me, face pale but smiling. "I told you not to wait," she said. I didn't. I lied. We didn't speak again that night. There was no need. But in the dark I knew something had changed. They knew we were close. The net was tightening, and we were running out of road. The next morning came slow and heavy. Fog clung to the ground like ghosts reluctant to let go. We didn't speak as we moved. Our voices felt too loud for the silence of the woods. Each step was a negotiation between caution and urgency. The world had narrowed to a single goal, reached the ridge beyond the forest, where shepherds traveled and roads forked into the east. We were close. Our bodies were failing. My legs trembled with each incline, and Ahelia limped, her wound now crusted but angry. But the air smelled of pine and freedom. Just beyond this stretch, so we told ourselves, was the end of pursuit. And then we heard the horn. It cut through the air like a blade, a hunter's call, not for deer, but for us. We ran. We didn't choose direction, only speed. Down ravines, across shallow streams, past startled birds and rustling leaves. The world blurred. I felt blood in my mouth. My side screamed. I saw nothing but movement, breath, mud, light. My thoughts vanished. Only instinct remained. Sehen und Sicht. A Fall. Aelia slipped on wet rock, her leg buckling beneath her. She cried out, "Sharp! Involuntary!" And I turned back, sliding down the slope to reach her. Her face was twisted with pain. The wound had reopened, bleeding now through torn cloth. "They'll be here soon," she said, her voice brittle. "You have to go. Nox pese. You must." He tore the strips from my tunic, tied them tight around her leg. Her fingers dug into the earth as she bit down pain. I looked around. No shelter, no cover, only open land. And then, behind us, the sound of hooves. Close, so close. Aelia grabbed my wrist. "Livius," she said. "You were free the moment you ran. Don't give that back now." "If I didn't leave you before," I said, "then don't leave me now. Not to die, but to mean something." She placed the flint in my hand, the one that you had given me. For fire, or for memory. Tears stung my eyes, but I stood. I didn't run. He carried her. We moved slow, stumbling, half dragging, every sound behind us louder than it was, every heartbeat a drum. But the ridge came into view, the trees thinning, the slope rising, and then the figures 3, maybe 4, not riders, shepherds, a wagon, wool sacks, faces, pale with surprise. One of them moved toward us. "Are you hurt?" I could barely speak. "Oh, please," I rasped. "She needs help. Behind us, another horn." The shepherd turned. "Quick! Under the wool! Now!" The wool stank of lanolin and dust, but it was warm, and it hit us. I could feel Aelia's breath beside me, shallow, strained, but steady. The shepherd's voice drifted over us, calm but tight with tension. He spoke with the ease of a man used to hiding truth beneath simplicity. Moments later, the riders arrived. Their voices were louder, sharper. "Fugitives!" one barked. 2 of them, man and a girl. "Seen anything?" "No one but sheep," the shepherd answered. "Then what's in the wagon?" "Wolfermarket, unless Rome's now taxing that too." A silence followed, long enough to freeze the blood. Then the sound of footsteps circling the wagon. I held my breath so long my chest screamed. Aelia's fingers found mine beneath the wool. She didn't squeeze, she just touched. Then, half beats. Plink, half beats. Retreating, half. Reporting. To her room, half beats. Retreating, half beats. Returning, half beats. And silence. The shepherd's face appeared between the wool folds. He nodded. "You'll ride with me till the bend. After that, the east road splits. Follow the sun." We moved again. Aelia was too weak to walk far. The shepherd handed me a staff, gave her water, and said little else. Just before we reached the crossroads, he stopped the cart and looked at me. "You'll need names," he said. I blinked. Names? New ones. For free folk. I hadn't thought of that. My mouth opened but no words came. Aelia answered for us both. "I'm Livia," she said softly. I turned to her. She looked so pale, yet so certain. "And you?" she asked. I paused. Let the amplification come again. Not Livius. That name had been given to me in chains. That name belonged to silence. I spoke my true name, the one my mother had whispered beneath starlight before Rome took everything. I hadn't said it in years, but when I did, it felt like the earth breathed with me. The shepherd nodded once, then handed me the reins. "From here," he said, "the path is yours." The sun broke through the clouds as we walked. Each step still hurt. My legs still ached. The past still clung to me like a scar. But the road stretched forward, open, endless, and this time I chose it.